All right, we've looked at Ruth. First chapter was kind of sad. 3 people died, famine, difficulty. But Ruth elected to come back to the people of God and the land of God with Naomi. So they passed the grief. In chapter 2, we saw guidance, where her hap was to light on the field of a wealthy bachelor. It's the kind of story we like. God was guiding her. And today we're going to look at, hopefully, 3 and 4. One pastor entitled his sermon about chapter 3, A Beautiful and Scandalous Night, which is an odd combination. And there are 2 views looking on what happened this night, and I'll share some of both, and I will make you choose which you would like to believe. But most of all, I want us to see grace in this chapter. Grace. And we are dealing with a word that I think some of you do Hebrew word studies with a concordance. It's this word or it's this word, and these are 2 different parts of speech that I cannot explain, and probably only Sally, as an English expert, would know. I left participles a long time ago. This is the term that is in Ruth, and it is translated as the kinsman or the kinsman redeemer. Now, the wonderful thing about this word is that the other 62 times that word is in the Old Testament, it's translated redeemer, and it's talking about God. So we have a wonderful picture here of what God does for us. Now, the kinsman redeemer, if you got destitute, could help you in 3 ways. That person could, if you had to sell your land, your inheritance, could buy it back for you and give it back to you. If an individual not only had to sell their land, but they had sold themselves into slavery, the kinsman redeemer could buy you and set you free. And if you were a widow, the kinsman redeemer could marry you, and the child that is born of that union would be the inheritor of the dead man's land and name. So it was a way for the family name to continue. Now, I will tell you, you could have a kinsman who did not help you in those ways. So it had to be a kinsman. Only a few people had that right. That was a small circle of kin. First of all, they had to have the power to do it, because if your kin was as poor as you, that wasn't any help. And then they had to have the willingness, because if a man knows he's going to get some land, that's good. But if he's got to marry somebody, that's another thing. Or maybe he's already married and doesn't want to do that. So this is what is at stake. Now, Naomi knows that the man Boaz is a kinsman. And she has already used the word that just means relative. It's not this special word, but it means he's a relative. So that brings up this thought in your mind. I want you to look at your scripture as we talk. We're going over a lot of verses, and we won't read them all aloud. I hope you've read them, but I want you to look at them to make sure I'm not lying to you while we talk about it. The first verse, the first word of chapter 3 is then. This is at the end of the barley and wheat harvest, a time of about 3 months. Naomi says to Ruth, "Shall I not seek rest for you?" Which is a quaint way of saying seek a husband for you, as the parents arranged the weddings. Now, some of us, when we had that word in chapter 1, and it talked about seeking a husband, seeking rest, at the end of Bible study, some of us were leaving and laughing about that, because sometimes husbands are a lot of trouble here and take a lot of time. But this is a sweet word, and it is rest because it speaks of someone to take care of you and not just being on the front lines alone. And so Naomi says in verse 2, Boaz is one of our kindred, and you have been working with his female servants. Behold, he winnows barley tonight in the threshing floor. This is something we have no modern comparison to. But after the harvest, they would save all the harvest, let the stalks dry, and then they would put them on a threshing floor, usually with an oxen to pull a heavy wooden sled behind, and it would break the grain loose from the straw. But then they would have to separate it, and God gave them wonderfully in this land a wonderful breeze off the Mediterranean that blew every night starting about 4. And sometimes at 4 it was too strong. It would blow away the grain. But by sunset it would be just right. And they would take all that stuff that's all mixed up and throw it up and let the wind blow away the chaff. It sounds like having grass on your neck, doesn't it? Doing that job. But they were so glad to be able to do it and to get the grain. Well, that's what's happening, and it's on the threshing floor, which was always on a hilltop to catch the wind. That was the only time that was used, when they had harvest. So it was a interesting place. Be a good place to sit when it wasn't harvest and just look over the mountains. Well, that's what Boaz is doing, and this is Naomi's strange instruction. When he lies down to sleep, the men would all be threshing. You look at where he lies down, and you go in and uncover his feet and lie down at his feet, and he will tell you what to do. Now, I will just say there is no precedent in Scripture or in the writings of antiquity that this was a normal procedure. So I don't know if Naomi is trying to work this out without herself asking Boaz to do this, or I don't know if it's good or bad. It is unusual. You realize that you lose your body heat through the top of your head and the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. So if you uncover someone's feet, they will lose body heat until their body coolness wakes them up. And if you put a hat on your head and gloves on your hands and boots on your feet, it feels real good. In the winter, it keeps your body heat in. So I don't know if Ruth knows anything about Kinsman Redeemer, or she sure never heard about this in the Scripture. But verse 5, she says to Naomi, "Everything you say to me, I will do." That shows us her submissive heart. And she went down to the threshing floor. Now, I don't know why it says down, because it was up. But she went, maybe it was not as high as where she and Naomi lived. But she went down there, and she did how much of what her mother-in-law asked her to do? All of it in verse 6. Well, verse 7 tells us the men had winnowed until it was very late, and then they had eaten and drunk, and if they've been working all day, I know that was a good meal. His heart was merry, and that is a word in the Hebrew that can just mean happy, relieved, joyful, have a harvest, have food. It can also mean drunk. But there's nothing in the context that tells us that was the case. And the men would put all the grain in the center, and all the men would lie down around it with their feet out. And they did this to protect it, because this was the time of the judges, and their enemies would come steal it after they did all that work. So they were going to be a living barrier around their harvest. And the Bible says that Ruth came softly. I wonder if our husbands ever describe us as coming softly. Or do we come intently? Now, I wonder if Ruth wanted to maybe tickle his feet after she uncovered them to get on with this matter, but she did not. And then it tells us in verse 8 that at midnight, Boaz woke up and he was afraid, and he wasn't sure who was at his feet. How many of you mothers have ever been awakened suddenly at night and your kid is standing there right by you? It is scary, even though it's your kid. You aren't expecting it. And that's what happened to him. I can think of some men who woke up in strange situations in the Bible. I think of Adam, who went to sleep single and woke up married. I think of Jacob, who thought he was marrying Rachel and woke up to someone else. So Boaz is in a good company, I guess. And he said, "Who is it? Who is that down there by my feet?" Verse 9, she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your skirt over me, for you are a near kinsman." You are a kinsman redeemer. She used that word. Now you see how this situation is kind of questionable, and some people would say this was inappropriate. It does say where she was lying was at his feet, not beside him. But I think perhaps Boaz, as a man, had to exercise godly restraint. Wouldn't that be every man's dream, to wake up with a woman at their feet? So Ruth asked him, she says, "Let me tell you why I'm here. I want you to spread your skirt over me." That's interesting. That word translated skirt is the same word that Boaz used of Ruth when he said, "You have come to seek safety under the wings of God." It's translated wing or skirt. Now, we know the men wore robes, and even today in some Jewish weddings and in almost all Arab weddings, part of the ceremony is the man throwing part of his skirt over his wife, shows he is taking her to himself as her protector and provider. And it's still a symbol that's used today. Now, we're going to look at a lot of pictures of salvation, but I think when we come to Christ for salvation, we are asking Him to take us on and to put His protection over us and His guidance over us. Well, verse 10, Boaz responds to her request and says, "Blessed are you of the Lord," and he uses that respectful title, "my daughter. You have showed more kindness now than at the beginning, because you have not followed young men, whether they're poor or rich." Now, Ruth was young. I don't know how you would have felt at 20, marrying a man that was older or much older. I think what Boaz has just heard is maybe something he's been thinking about, because we saw in the last chapter he was very nice to Ruth. He went over and above in what he did for her. And he says here, the first thing he says to her is, "Blessed be you of the Lord." That's a prayer for her. And he praises her behavior. If she had gone after a young man, she could have maybe gotten out of having to take care of Naomi. But she has not done that. I wonder if not years ago, but months ago, when she left her homeland and returned with Naomi to Israel, she thought, "I'm losing my best chance to get married here. I'll be a foreigner. I won't be desirable because I'm from Moab. I don't know if Naomi can arrange a wedding. I'm probably giving up marriage." But you never give up your best chance for anything by following what the Lord tells you to do. That's a good thing for you mothers with marriageable daughters to teach. You want to wait for God's man. Because when we are young, we're not the sharpest tools in the shed. How many of you feel like you didn't really know the man you married when you married him? That should be every hand, because you just learn a lot more after marriage. And that's why it's wonderful to trust God. And then in verse 11, Boaz says, "Now my daughter, don't be afraid. I see him protecting her." I guess one time I need the protection of my husband is when there's a mouse in the garage. Even if it's a dead mouse, it scares me. I had a traumatic mouse experience as a child, and it just did something to me. And I'm so grateful for a husband that has no fear, just walks right out there and deals with that mouse. But he protects me from having to. He says, "Don't be afraid in this. I will do to thee all that thou ask. I will marry you. She kind of asked him to marry her. But that's something about salvation. Does Jesus just take a person out here and say, okay, I'm going to make you saved? There's a cooperation on the part of the person who's saved. When they realize they are separated from God and sinners, they're willing to turn and ask Jesus to save them. So that's a beautiful picture of that. It's interesting to me that Boaz calls her what at the end of verse 11? A daughter at the beginning, but at the end, what is? Virtuous woman. Oh, we hear a lot about the virtuous woman from Proverbs 31. What a wonderful title. I would hope people would look at us and think, that's a virtuous woman. Well, and I appreciate Ruth being willing to marry the older man to carry on the name of her father-in-law and his sons. But at this point, Boaz drops a bombshell here. Verse 12, it's true that I am your near kinsman, but there's another kinsman nearer than I. Oh no, we've been reading this love story and loving it. Now here's a monkey wrench. Verse 12 says this, and Boaz could have just done the job without talking to the nearer kinsman. Tells us he was a man of integrity. He reminds me of the passage in the New Testament that we are to esteem others better than ourselves and respect their rights. What I love about this verse is that he may have told himself that he's too old for Ruth, but I think he had love in his heart for Ruth, and he's already been thinking about this guy. That's the nearer kinsman. So he says to her in verse 13, stay here tonight, and in the morning we'll talk to him. Now, why did Boaz say stay here tonight? She's in a little awkward position. But this was the time of judges. Would he send her from the country back to the city at night by herself? No, he protects her again. And if he will be the kinsman, okay, he gets you. But if he won't do it, then I will do it. And as the Lord lives, a way to say we're going to take care of this tomorrow. Now, in the Hebrew language, there are two words that are translated tarry or stay here. And one of them carries a sexual connotation, stay here for the wrong reason. I remember a song I hated as a young person, Go Away, Little Girl. You remember that song? That's nothing but about immorality. But it's true. But he says stay here and his integrity will protect her. And we'll see what happens in the morning. And verse 14 says that Ruth did what he said. She lay at his feet until the morning, and she rose up before anyone could know another, while it was still dark. And he said to her, don't let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. That was a man's place. Now, is he protecting her again? From what? Reputation. From the gossipers. We've already seen these ladies in Bethlehem. They are, whatever is new, they talk about. And then in verse 15, he says, bring your veil, that's over your head, and hold it. And what did he measure out for her? The grain, the barley. We don't know how much. It wasn't as much as she got gleaning, because it's 6 measures, but the measure is not named. 6 ephahs would have been about 250 pounds of barley. So I'm sure he didn't put that in her headdress. But apparently the readers back in the day would have known. And in verse 16, when she came to her mother-in-law, Naomi said to Ruth, who are you, my daughter? Are you Ruth, the Moabite widow? Or are you Ruth, Boaz's fiance. How did it go? And look at the last part of verse 16. Ruth holds nothing back from Naomi at all. She tells him everything that had happened and everything that was said. And Naomi said, she tells Naomi about the barley. It's interesting what Boaz said to her when she was receiving the barley. Go not empty to your mother-in-law. Does anybody remember what Naomi said when she came back to Bethlehem? She said, I left here full, but I am coming back empty. And Boaz said, no, I'm filling you up, honey. And Naomi says to Ruth in verse 18, just sit here, and he's not going to rest until this is worked out. Well, I couldn't stop at the end of 3. We have to see what happens next. Then at chapter 4, verse 1, Boaz goes to the city gate, which is kind of where the county court met. And if you had 10 men who are elders of the city, which I always wonder, what did these guys have to do but sit around in the gate and pass judgment or whatever? They're going to have court. He sat down there, and there's a behold in verse 1. What is the remarkable thing that happened when Boaz got there? That nearer kinsman, oh, he just happened to be there. How fortuitous here. And Boaz says to him, hey there, sit down. And the man turned aside and sat down. And verse 2, Boaz took 10 of the men of the city. He said, you sit down here. Now we've got a ruling body, a jury or whatever, witnesses. And they sat down. And verse 3, Boaz says to the kinsman, Naomi that has come out of the country of Moab has sold, is the tense in the Hebrew, a parcel of land which belonged to Elimelech. It would have to have been sold if Boaz is going to redeem it, or they're going to redeem it. And I thought to advertise or to inform you that you are the nearest kinsman and you can buy it before the elders that we've got assembled here. So if you will redeem it, but if you won't redeem it, tell me and I'll redeem it. And the nearer kinsman said, sure, I'll do that. But Boaz hasn't told the whole truth. There's more to this deal. Verse 5, Boaz says, oh, and when you buy the land that belonged to Elimelech, you must take Ruth the Moabitess, Ruth the pagan lady, and raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. You must marry her, and the first child that's born will have the name of the father and inherit the land. I would say in verse 5, Boaz played his trump card. Do you know trump cards? Do you play rook? There's power in your trump card over situations. And I know that what Boaz wants is not fields. It is Ruth. In verse 6, the kinsman said, oh, no, I can't redeem it for myself or I will mess up my inheritance. Probably he was married and had children, and he wanted his land to go to his children. And if he married a younger woman and there was more than one child, the second, third, and fourth would be part of his inheritance, and that would mean smaller amount for his children. He says, I don't want to do this. Now, that's one reason that he could have said, I don't want to do that. I thought of some others with some help from people I studied. It may be that when Ruth and Naomi came back to Bethlehem and they were destitute, and his wife knew about this law, she looked at him and said, don't you even think about it. We're not going to have another wife. Or maybe the man didn't mind taking Ruth because she was young and beautiful, but he didn't want Naomi to have to take care of. Or maybe he felt like you would get cooties if you associated with a Moabite, like people do today. Or maybe he was afraid if he married Ruth, he would die because her last husband died, and even Naomi's husband died. Well, there's something going on here with these women. Maybe really bad cooks, I don't know. But the one that found acceptance in my heart and mind is that he already had children. He was a nice man because he was going to do it, but he just didn't want to marry, and I'm kind of glad he didn't if he already had a family. Whatever was his excuse, he's missing out on the treasure that was in that field that Boaz is buying. Now, verse 7 tells us this was the manner in Israel concerning this process. To confirm it, if a man took off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor, this was a testimony that he was doing it. Now, that's a strange thing. Up at the top of your sheet where I told you about the land, the individual, and the widows, right? Thank you, Karen. I've given you the references. And that one in Deuteronomy about the widow said the widow was supposed to ask the kinsman to do this. And if he would not do it, she took his shoe and spit in his face. And it was considered a shame that he would not do this for his brothers, or whatever the near kin was. Taking off a shoe, only free people had shoes. Slaves didn't wear shoes. So it was a shame if you took off your shoe. I'm very glad that Ruth did not have to go to him and ask him and spit in his face in front of the town elders and all the lady gossips who were probably standing around. So he took his shoe off to say, this transaction is happening. And the kinsman said to Boaz, buy it. So he drew off his shoe. And look at Boaz's wonderful proclamation. He said to the elders and to the other people that I knew were standing there, you are witnesses today. You are witnesses today that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was his 2 sons from the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, I have purchased to be my wife, and to raise up the dead, the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that his name not be cut off from among his brethren, and from the gate of this place. You are witnesses. Well, isn't it wonderful that salvation is setting free all these people in bondage and bringing them to a new inheritance in the name of Christ? Poor Naomi and Ruth, they had no money to pay any of this off, to pay any of their debts, or to even buy food. And Boaz is going to do this for them. Ladies, I used to be over here, and I was in bondage to sin. And I tried to pay it off for many years of my life. But it was not until I put my faith in Christ that I found a way to be adopted into this family. This is such a wonderful thing. It makes me just want to shout. Well, we talked about to function as the Kinsman Redeemer, you had to have the right. Does Christ have the right to rescue us? Is he our kinsman? How? He became a man. He would not be our relative had he not done that. He would have been above us. Could he have saved us from his position of divine power and never be made a man? I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think so. Because it was in the plan of God for him to be made a man. I don't understand, I think, the depths of why God required blood, except it tells us the seriousness of sin, which we kind of tend to. We know other people's sin is serious, but ours is not so bad. But that is what it took. He had to be made like us. Now, he could have been just a wonderful priest. The book of Hebrews that the men are studying talks about Christ as our high priest. Why couldn't he just come as a priest? He had to be the Passover lamb, and he had to be spotless. Every priest who offered sacrifices had to first offer sacrifices for his own sin. The only one who never had a sin to pay for was Christ. That gave him the power to save us to the uttermost. Was he willing? Yes. Even knowing. So do you see how Christ is our kinsman redeemer? And a lot of times you will see the Lord say in the Old Testament, I am your redeemer. And it's this word. I'm going to be your brother, your human brother, and I'm going to save you from sin. It's wonderful. Well, Boaz makes this wonderful proclamation. Look at chapter 4, verse 11, the very first part. What do all these listeners say? Witnesses. We're witnesses. Every time a pastor marries a couple, he has to have what? Witnesses. I think this is maybe a little hint for us why marriage is important. There are people today who say, can't we just be married before God? We'll think of ourselves as married. There's something severely lacking in a love that doesn't want witnesses, doesn't want it legal. That's another thing to teach your daughters. The last part of 11, the crowd says, the Lord make the woman that is come into your house, Boaz, like Rachel and Leah, which two did build the house of Israel. Let's think about this just a minute. Rachel and Leah, can you remember back that far? That's not the order they were. It was Leah and Rachel. Why did these people say Rachel and Leah? The love story evidenced by
his persistence to win her.
Well, his persistence to work 14 years. What about after she died? He loved her till the day he died, but in Bethlehem, he built Rachel's tomb, an early Taj Mahal of a man who loved his wife so much, he built a mausoleum for her grave, and it was in Bethlehem. So Rachel was big in Bethlehem. She had the tomb there. That was his first love and his only love, really. And then they say, do thou worthily in Ephratah. That's another language words for the town of Bethlehem, and be famous in Bethlehem. Don't we have we have the prophecy of Christ, thou Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, out of thee shall come the ruler. And then in verse 12, let thy house be not only like Rachel and Leah's prolific children, be like Pharez, whom Tamar bare to Judah. That's a sad story, which we may study. Janice, you've suggested we do. It's just a doozy of the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. Actually, this is the only place in Scripture in the Old Testament that puts Christ in Judah's seed. This is the family that populated Bethlehem, the children of Jacob and Pharez. In verse 13, so the witnesses get to watch the wedding. Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife. They made it official. They signed the license or whatever they had to do. It was witnessed by the people. And he went into her, which is an Old Testament expression for they had sexual relations. It seems that many scholars think men and women lived in different tents. And so the husband would go to the wife's tent to have sex with her. Yes, if you had more than one wife, you had better separate those wives. Better of all, you had not better have more than one wife. And the Lord gave her conception. We've seen this in several studies, how the Lord gives children. And she bare a son. And the women, here's the women talking again. After they shouted, witnesses here, they say to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, which did not leave you without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. You know, do you realize that when Jesus redeemed you, you were making him famous for what he does in your life? Famous as the one who can change our hearts. And verse 15, he will be to you a restorer of your own life and a nourisher of your old age. And then they say, for your daughter-in-law, who actually loves you, Naomi, is better to you than 7 sons. Naomi had 2 sons, and they're both dead. Better to you than 7 sons. I think Ruth was something very special. And verse 16, can all the grandmothers bear testimony to the fact that this is what you like to do? You get to rock that baby and love them and kiss those little cheeks and give them back at night. Boaz restored what they have lost and would be a nourisher of her. She's not going to just live hand to mouth. This is a picture of what Jesus does for us. He restores us because there are a lot of losses when we live our life here in sin, a lot of pain. He restores our soul and he nourishes us through life. Now, verse 17 is the reason I put glory for this chapter on your sheet. The glory of all this is that Ruth and Boaz would have many descendants in Bethlehem for hundreds of years. Who can tell me who Boaz was himself a descendant of? Anybody know Boaz's mother? This will surprise you. Rahab. You remember that story? When they came into the land to take it, Jericho was the first battle. Rahab hid the spies. They saved her life. And if you look at verse 21, Rahab married Salman, and her child was Boaz. Now this is interesting because that's probably, well, it's a while. But it was at the very beginning of the conquest of the Holy Land, which took about 25 years. But now the period of the judges was around 300 years. So I don't think Boaz is 300 years old. It may be there were descendants between there, and for sake of conciseness, to let us know which Boaz he's talking about, that is there. But maybe that's one reason Boaz wasn't ashamed to marry a Moabitess, because in his history, somebody married his mother, who was a harlot. Speaking of the forgiveness of this, verse 17 says they call this baby, they call it the baby born to Naomi. I don't think that's good for grandparents to claim their grandkids. They called his name Obed, and Obed can either mean worshiper or a servant who worships. Both of those names are wonderful. And Obed was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David. And where was David born? In Bethlehem. And David is the ancestor of Christ. And where was Christ born? Bethlehem. And when you read that genealogy of Christ that's in Matthew chapter 1, there are 4 women of questionable character who are mentioned. And Ruth is one. Her character is questionable because she was a Moabite and that was pagan. That encourages me The four women mentioned in Matthew 1, which is unusual for women to be mentioned, they all had something wrong with them. They all had cooties, or they all were disgraced, or they all were. Did you ever have to read the Scarlet Letter? They all had to wear the A for adultery in their whole life. And yet, if they're sinners in Christ's ancestors, there can be sinners in his descendants when he takes us to salvation. He is mighty to redeem. Well, I love Ruth and I love Naomi. Well, thank you, ladies. We've used our full hour. Quick, rescue the nursery workers. We'll meet again the 23rd.